oh, there's been 500,000 people who've had an abduction experience or claim they've had an abduction experience. They're either all hallucinating this experience, but they're hallucinating it with the same variables each time, or it's real and they are being abducted.
Keep watching to learn more.
Book 4 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is an insider's perspective on UFO, UAP disclosure. And my guest, Jim Semivan, is an insider in 2 different ways. He is co-founder and vice president of operations of To the Stars Incorporated, an organization dedicated to media awareness of UFO, UAP phenomenology. Jim retired in 2007 after a 25-year career in the Central Intelligence Agency's National Clandestine Service. At the time of his retirement, he was a member of the CIA's Senior Intelligence Service. He served multiple overseas and domestic tours, along with senior management positions at the CIA headquarters. He is the recipient of the agency's Career Intelligence Medal. It was during this period that he became involved in exploring UFO-related phenomena, prompted to do so by his own personal experiences. Jim is based in the East Coast, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Jim. It is a pleasure to be with you.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Jeffrey. I know I'm going to enjoy this conversation.
Well, I'm going to enjoy it too, and I'm sure our viewers will enjoy it. Let me preface things by saying to the viewers who have heard the introduction, I made a mistake. I said that you are an insider with regard to UFO UAP in 2 different ways, thinking about your work in the CIA and your personal experiences. However, on reflection, I think it's more than 2, because you've been engaged in both research through To the Stars Academy and also media projects. So you're an insider in at least 4 different ways. Maybe a 5th way as an informal consultant to some of the activity that's taking place right now with the government. So you're an insider in at least, now that I'm counting, 5 different ways.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I would classify myself as an insider. I happen to know, quite a few of the people, what we would refer to as the heavyweights, as with you, who are involved in this particular topic. I am not, however, I should say right up front, involved, or was I ever involved in the legacy program, nor am I involved in any CIA program revolving UAP, or was I ever involved. All my knowledge about current events came within the 2014 timeframe. Although I've been studying this phenomenon for well over 40 years. I'm not a researcher by any stretch, nor am I a scientist. I'm a student of the topic. It's probably the best way to describe myself.
To be clear, you've never had a decision-making role within the government involving UFOs.
Involving UAP or the phenomenon, no. Absolutely not. I was in the senior ranks of the government, but I dealt with things that were all CIA related. And so I had a marvelous career. I enjoyed it immensely. And I was sort of sad when I left, but at the same time, I knew it was time to go. But I stayed with it as an independent contractor for 12 years and enjoyed that as much as I did my career.
So I think it's fair to say that you have a good understanding of the inside workings of the intelligence community.
I worked across the intelligence community almost my whole career. There's generally when you're an operations officer like I was, you work with other, you work with the FBI, you work with the White House, you work with other, DIA, DOD, some of the military organizations, and you name the government organization. I had some kind of relationship with them through my 34 or 5 years with the government.
So that our viewers understand, you've also had personal experiences and have known other people who have had direct personal experiences with this phenomenon.
Yes. I had my wife and I, back in the early 90s, and it wasn't until, I don't know, I would say probably the late 90s when I started nosing around in my own organization and in other organizations, and it came to light that there were a lot of people who've had these types of experiences. So we discussed it in an unofficial way. Now, I wasn't part of, Jacques Vallée's Invisible College at that time, but I was a part of a very, very small, localized group within the intelligence community. And it was very, very informal, where we talked about it in general, wondering, what it was all about. But we knew it was an extraordinarily strange topic, and there wasn't any place we can refer ourselves to. There wasn't a UFO desk, so to speak, that we knew of, that I knew of at the time. I didn't. Now I do, but I didn't then. So
there are things that you do know from having been privy to information that you cannot talk about.
When you join any intelligence organization, when you become indoctrinated, so to speak, you sign, they call them non-disclosure agreements, but really it's a lot more than that. I mean, it's a vow and a promise that you make never to reveal classified information for whatever reason. So it's something that, it's just a standard rule that we all abide by. I mean, Lou Elizondo abides by it, as does Chris Mellon, myself, Hal, Puthoff, all these people, John Alexander, Kit Green. I mean, we take it very, very seriously. And even when we're together, we also recognize the fact that there's something called need to know. So we may all have the same clearances, top secret, special compartmented information, TK, talent keyhole. You speak, that's a satellite system where information sometimes come from. That's top secret. But there are different silos of top secret information. So their silo might be different than my silo, but unless they have a need to know my silo, then we don't discuss things. So it's interesting to watch us together, because sometimes there's a dance going on, and what do they know? Are they read into the same things I'm read into? And I remember Hal, talking to me about things that he was allowed to read me into. And Lou Elizondo, same way. And they were able to share with me things. And that was sort of my initiation into the more classified realm of phenomenology, not so much UAP, but UAP was part of it, but it was really the phenomenology surrounding it and the veracity of it. And it sort of alters your worldview. And you know this probably better than anyone.
Well, you mentioned Hal Puthoff, and of course, he's a very important person in my life. He's one of the founders, really, of the discipline of remote viewing, and at the same time, deeply engaged in the study of UFOs and UAP. So there's an overlap, clearly, between the world of parapsychology and the world of ufology. And I gather that amongst your colleagues and in your own experience, that is well recognized.
Oh, I think without question. I think a lot of people are very concerned nowadays about whether it's a possibility to have a unified theory of psychic phenomenon. How do you, if there's 20, I think there's 25, 26 types of psychic phenomenon, clairvoyance, ESP, you can go down the list. And then you have UAP, you have near-death experiences, poltergeist activity, parapsychology in general, past lives. They're somehow, I think everybody realizes they're somehow connected, but we know the dots. We think we know some of the dots, but we don't know if they're connected or how they're connected, but it certainly seems that they are connected in some way. And that all points to higher dimensional reality and the fact that we don't die. We just don't. We just move on to another area, another plane, whether you want to call it hyperspace, heaven. It's just, I'm totally convinced of that. It's, I don't have very many beliefs, but that's one of them that I can't shake that. My life, my experiences in my life. I think you mentioned it once in the paper you wrote on near-death experience, where you won the award from the Bigelow Institute, and you said your experience was as real to you as anything else that you've experienced. And I have to really repeat that and say, yes, mine was the same way. It was as real as me chatting with you and as real to me having conversations with my friends on a daily basis. It's that real. Yes.
Viewers of this channel will be familiar with Chris Bledsoe, who's been interviewed many times on this channel. And your name came up during those interviews because Chris felt that he owed a debt to you. I don't know if he put it quite that way, but it was as if you rescued him and his family by acknowledging the reality of his very exotic experiences with orbs that appeared to be inhabited by a being that he calls the Lady. Can you talk about your encounter with Bledsoe?
I met Chris through a fellow named Larry Fraschella out in Pennsylvania. And Larry he's a wonderful guy. He and his brother David, and they were basically looking after Chris for a while and helping him out if they could. And Larry and I got together on a completely different topic. And Larry brought us together in New York City. Chris, I think two of his sons, and his wife, Yvonne, lovely, lovely lady, and my wife and myself. And it was there that I was able to chat with Chris and the family and let them know in no uncertain terms that what Chris experienced was indeed true, and that, if anything, he needed support. And from not only from his family, but he needed it from his community and from other people. And this is one of the problems that happen with people that have these very dramatic experiences. There isn't any place to go, and everything you say sounds completely, off the mark. And it's absurd, actually, some of the things you say. And when he had explained to me what had happened to him, it was a classic experience, most likely abduction in his case. Where he had all these different variables associated with abduction happen to him, and not only to him, but also to his son and to the two other people that were with him. So his story, as far as I'm concerned, has always been the same. It's never really changed. And I felt so sorry for him because if you know Chris, he's one of the loveliest people alive, and he doesn't have a mean bone in his body, and he's very sincere and comes from a very interesting background. So I then went to his home after that, and he invited me down and chatted with his children and some of the neighbors and friends of the children, and again, letting them know, please, take this man seriously. And because I can tell you, I had a similar experience, and I'm not anybody's fool. And I also know from what I've been told and what I've experienced that this is actually very, very real, but we can't explain it. And so I think that helped Chris a little bit, and I was happy to do so. He has a wonderful family. I just really, really salt of the earth. So I count him as a very good friend of mine. So I don't agree with him on some of the aspects of what he talks about, but that's perfectly normal. His experience, he experiences his experience in his way, and he interprets it the way he wants to interpret it, or how he feels about it, what's true and what's not true. So you can't discount that, and I give him all the credit in the world for that. I don't know if the conclusions he came to are something that I would come to. I have a more of a cautious approach to this than I think he does, but other than that, we both have the same belief that yes, indeed, this did occur.
We should talk, at least briefly, for our viewers and let them know about your work with To the Stars Incorporated.
Yes, To the Stars. It's a fascinating company. It started around 2015, maybe 2016, I think. I had met Tom DeLonge. I had been called by friends of ours. I won't name them, but asking me if I had read Secret Machines. It was a book that Tom had published with A.J. Hartley. It was a fiction book, and I said no, and I said I don't even know who Mr. DeLonge is. And they said, well, you should read the book, and then you should listen to a interview he had with George Knapp on Coast to Coast AM. So I listened to the interview first, then I bought the book, and then I realized that Mr. DeLonge was talking about things that had I got to be careful here. There are some things in the book I think were reasonably accurate as a reflection of maybe what was going on in the government. So I knew he had advisors, and he had talked about the 10 advisors that he had. So it was an informal thing where we contacted him and asked to meet him to determine perhaps there might have been some leak of some classified information. So I flew out there and met with Tom. And we had a wonderful dinner in a hotel in Encinitas, where he lives. And it became very apparent to me. Two things became very apparent. One, this man is very well read and very knowledgeable on this topic. And number two, there really wasn't a leak of any information at all. And I guess I'll add a third one. Yeah, he did have advisors, because the way he spoke with me, clearly he knew, he was able to put things together that that people were telling him, because essentially what he wanted to do was he had met everybody through, I think, Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, and that's how it all started, and people introduced him to people, and it turned out that, after the Russian hack of Hillary Clinton's emails, it came out that yes, indeed, he was in touch with Podesta and General McCaslin, who was former head of United States Air Force R&D, and I won't name the third one, but and Tom refuses to tell me, who the other ones are, and I don't ask, although I do know. I have found out who two of them were, and they were very senior intelligence community officials. He still won't acknowledge it. So, and he knows how to keep a secret. It's what I love about him. And or confidence, I should say, in this particular case, because I don't think anybody was telling him any secrets. But he was able to put two and two together, and he came up with this wonderful story in Secret Machines. So anyway, we were chatting, and he invited me to lunch, and I told him, oh, by the way, there's some other people down here that would like to meet you. and it was Hal. I won't name the other ones because they don't want to be named, but and two other luminaries, I might add. And he invited us all. Tom invited us all to join an organization he wanted to start, and he had a name for it, To the Stars, and we all declined. And then he said why, and then I think Hal and I explained to him, look, we're more interested in the R&D aspect of this, and the reason why we got involved with this in the beginning was to figure out a way to bring more information out on this particular topic without bringing in the government. In other words, the government doesn't own this topic, and we don't want to get into classified material. We just want to get this out. It's been all over the world. It shows itself all over the world. The military and the intelligence community doesn't control this. It can't control this. It's too big. So we want to devote time to researching it and find out what it was, privately and publicly. So he said, well, how would you want to do this? Let's start a company. So I sketched out on a cocktail napkin what it should look like. We wanted to do entertainment because I thought it was a really good way to educate people about this in an elevated way, a little bit more sophisticated way than you would get from Hollywood. And then we wanted to have some kind of an R&D focus. And he said, fine. And then we discussed, he just said, done. And so Hal and I said, well, yeah, why not? Let's do this. And we put some things in there. We wanted it to be a nonprofit at first, but then we realized that wasn't going to work for all kinds of business reasons. So eventually we made it into a public benefit corporation, and we were going pretty well. We hired Lou Elizondo, which was a feat, and then Steve Justice from the Skunk Works came on board, which is another one. A brilliant man, and then Chris Mellon came on board, and then we had Gary Nolan, and then our board of advisors, very distinguished board of advisors. But what happened was we thought that we would be able to collect enough money from small investors. We wanted it to be a real public benefit corporation, where small investors would come in and donate money, and then we would do the R&D and but we thought maybe we can do 15, 20 million. We barely got $1 million out of this. And if you have a company, particularly if you have, 8 or 10 employees, I don't get paid, by the way, neither does Tom or anybody else. But we do have people that do get paid that run the company. But in 2020, 2021, COVID hit, everything collapsed. So we decided at the time we didn't want to turn the company off, essentially. So we decided, let's focus on entertainment until we get our feet back on the ground, get some more investors in. Then we will go back and we have all these R&D projects on the shelf ready to roll. So that's where we are now. We have about a dozen projects with Hollywood and with streaming services. Legendary Pictures bought Secret Machines, the fiction series. We have a project on Tubi. It's an animated series. Brendan Fraser, Sarah Michelle Gellar are going to be on it. Josh Gad, I think, is signed up. We sold a new project to Sony. We sold one to Netflix. Paramount bought one. So they're all in different stages of development. So we're hoping we can attract larger investors to come in, and that's where we are at the moment. We're very, very optimistic that something is going to happen soon. So
the main purpose for our conversation, of course, is to talk about the disclosure process from your perspective. I do think you have a unique perspective, different, for example, than Danny Sheehan, who has been on this channel many times, who is a very strong advocate for disclosure. And I think if we were to talk to Danny, he's not here, so I can't be certain, but I think he would say full speed ahead. And I know you have many reservations.
I never met Danny Sheehan, but he's a wonderful guy, and I've listened to him before. I've seen him on podcasts, and he makes, he's a very talented attorney, and he makes really great arguments. And I take that, I don't have any, problems with what he's saying, except, let me start again here. Most of my friends are for disclosure. I'm for disclosure. but it has to be the type of disclosure that doesn't cause more issues than disclosure would be worth. And I know the Soul Foundation put out a wonderful paper written by Carl Nell on Colonel Nell, and he's a wonderful guy, very, very bright guy. And he wrote he did a wonderful presentation, I think at the last Soul Foundation, on this idea of limited disclosure and catastrophic disclosure and why you'd want to go for limited. And I don't disagree with him on it. What I like to caution people about is if you do limited disclosure, then you really have to seriously look at what that would mean, and how you would control the narrative in a civilization, and I say civilization, capital C, writ large, that is put together like our world civilization is. I mean, we have so many different things to consider. You have social, financial, psychological, economic, philosophical impacts that you have to prepare for, plan for. And, this has always been drummed into the back of my head. When I was in CIA, I used to work on big operations where we would run an operation to do something. And when you would do that, you would have to look at it and say, okay, we're geared to anywhere from 80 to 100% success rate. If we can't get an 80 to 100% success rate on this, then probably it's not a good idea to do it the way we're doing it. And then we would also try to sit back and say, what could go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? And that's the counterintelligence aspect to it and a security aspect to it. So then you come back and you say, okay, if we do this and this part goes wrong, and they're called points of failure. You list the points of failure you can have, and then you have to go in there and how do you mitigate those if they happen? So this is the same thing with disclosure. We don't know what the government knows. I mean, really what the government knows. I'm of the opinion that the government doesn't know much more than we do. I think they have downcraft. I think they have some type of ability probably to communicate maybe with NHI, but probably just rudimentary, or it's not really what I would call a very profound communication link. But I think they're pretty much in the dark about true intentions and capabilities. And I think they're in the dark about the technology because I think it's far beyond our ken. I can't imagine. Just watching the Nimitz episode, which has been out in the public, I've seen things that have not been out in the public, which are even more mind-boggling. There's no way we can explain how a craft that we know is a craft, because, we had a Spy 1 radar look at it, and we had all these multispectral systems looking at it, and they weren't anomalies. They were absolutely real. But if you're at 80,000 feet and you're going to 50 feet above the water in 0.78 seconds, you're talking hundreds, if not thousands of G-forces. The most an F-22 pilot can take is probably 9. I think structurally the plane would probably collapse or fall apart at 14. So this is not a technology that we own, and certainly the Russians don't, and neither do the Chinese. So clearly, to me and to others who have also seen the highly classified versions of this, there's no other explanation except it's non-human. It's from somewhere else, don't know where. And so I'm not interested, though, in the hardware. I'm interested in what's behind it. What does it mean? So this revert to disclosure in general. Because what happens if President Trump comes out next week and says, I'm going to hold a press conference on phenomenology, and he gets out and he says, look, we're not alone on the planet. There are other non-human intelligences on this planet. And maybe he says we have the downcraft to prove it, and the technology is beyond our technology, far beyond our technology. And we're not 100% sure what they want, but we don't think it's an existential threat. We think we're going to be okay. That's limited disclosure. Now, if you're a journalist, or you produce a podcast, or if you're Jeffrey Mishlove, you're going to sit down behind your computer and type out maybe 1,000 questions at minimum. What the hell does this mean? Because it's going to be an attempt by you and everybody else on this planet to fill in a narrative, right? That the president is not going to or can't fill in. So you've now lost control. If you're the president or the White House, you've now lost control of the narrative. So you have people then who are reacting to this in very different ways. I mean, you have a small group who decide this is crazy, we're going to be invaded, and they're, and maybe they had that prepper mentality anyway, and they're off. Maybe 3 to 5% of the world population goes off and hides in the mountains or whatever the hell they're going to do because they don't want to be around this. Then you might have a small group of people who decide they're going to basically stay where they are and worship it, right? And this is the new God, this is the new religion, and so you have that. And then you have people who are maybe going to pull their money out of the market and start hoarding. You're going to have people hoarding food. You're going to have people not going to work. You're going to have people storming their church for answers. Their church is not, or their synagogue, or their mosque, or their temple. They are not going to have the answers. The rabbis, the mullahs, the priests are not going to be able to come out and say anything except God works in mysterious ways, and let's let God handle this. He's not going to let anything bad happen. That can go only so far. So I think what happens is if you lose, and not by death, but if you lose anywhere between 10 and 20% of a population, there is a decent chance of societal collapse. There just is. And if you get to 30%, you have total societal collapse. So I think, and I know Carl Nell talks about this, there has to be some thought given to this. My point is, do you honestly think in the last 80 years that the government hasn't thought about this? Of course it has. It knows very well that there's non-human intelligence. We've known that since early 40s, and they've probably been discussing that since that time. And it's the reason, I think, why 14 presidents, from Truman on, have never said a word about this outside of in a very general sense. Yeah, there's strange stuff flying out there. We don't know what it is. But the veil hasn't been lifted. I mean, the veil is still there. We don't know what it is. And they leave it open to mean like, well, it could be this or it could be that. It could be China, it could be Russia. But they're not really coming out and giving you any in-depth discussion of that. So I think that's the problem. I'm living on a nice pension and a retirement account. I don't want to lose that. And I think, and that's, of course, very selfish on my part, but if you look and talk to people that are our age, and people that have, just ordinary people, they have so much on their plate. They have families. They are taking care of things. And if you would ask them, I think, well, do you want a 20 or 30% chance of this going away or somehow being disrupted? I think you're going to find people are not going to like that. And I think you're also going to find, and I use this quote all the time, is from, the Four Quartets, Eliot's famous poem, and I think Burt Norton, where he mentions humankind cannot bear too much reality. I'm also convinced of that. I think people, and I know this for myself, I don't think people can handle it. I really, truly don't. I know a lot of my friends think just the opposite, that we're an adaptable species. I think you could go, we suffered world wars, terrible calamities. I think this is much, much different. This is a paradigm shift. It's the mother of all paradigm shifts. It's somebody basically telling you that your reality isn't what you think it is, and that there is something far beyond what you actually know in this reality you live in. It is not upsetting the apple cart. It's upsetting everything. And I think that's one of my big issues with disclosure. Yeah, do I want to know? Hell yeah, I want to know. And do we have a right to know? Yes, we do. We really, truly do. But does the government want to yell fire in a crowded theater? And I might be wrong. I mean, I really, truly might be wrong, but I don't think I am.
And you're talking about limited disclosure and the risks associated with that.
It's barely disclosure. But then again, you look at who's going to fill the narrative. There's another problem. Do you want a Tucker Carlson to fill the narrative? Do you want an Alex Jones to fill the narrative? Do you want some crazy ass podcaster who doesn't know, his butt from a hole in the ground filling in this? Do you want every person who had an abduction experience, of which I would say 10 or 15% did not like the experience? Do you want them filling in the narrative? Do you want like Chris Bledsoe's narrative filling in the blanks? Well, yeah, you might say, yeah, well, it's a peaceful, loving, kind, compassionate narrative, but is it true? Is it accurate? And then when you start getting into the details of it, who are the NHI? How many quote unquote species does it compose? Or and again, what do they want? Why are they here? What are they telling us? You get into hybridization. You get into so many different areas. I don't know. And my experience has always been with NHI, and I share this with Jacques Vallée, and almost everything. I believe he's the guy I follow the most. Is that I think the best you can say about NHI is it's indifferent. I haven't seen any indication it's anything more than that. So. And sometimes worse.
And I was introduced to you through Robert Hastings, who has done a lot of work on, as you know, about UFOs and nukes. And the implication of his work is that they might save us from ourselves.
That's true. Particularly if you look at the two major messages they talk about. And the first one is, you're playing around with nuclear weapons and you shouldn't be. And we're just basically showing you by showing up at these places that, look, we're here. We don't like this. At least that's the message we may be getting, right? But their messages might be, well, we're inquisitive. We want to see what you're doing, and we don't like this. And the second message, which I think corresponds very well to the first message, is you're screwing around with with the ecology of the planet, and you have to take better care of the planet. And nuclear weapons isn't the way to do this, and nuclear power isn't the way to do this. That's what we think they're saying, but we really don't know what they're saying because they've never, ever shown themselves or came out and said anything. I made this comment to somebody once. I said, this phenomenon plays with you, it cajoles you, it teases you, it scares you, it frustrates you, it lures you into it, but you can never take it home to meet the parents, right? It doesn't come out and shake your hand and say, hey, I'm Mac and this is Bobby and we're from the Pleiades and we want to come in and talk to you about, and we're gonna. By the way, we're gonna cure cancer, and we have all this great technology. We're gonna even things out. The world's gonna look a whole. They don't do any of that. They don't do any of that. And we're always looking at it from this human perspective, this anthrocentric or anthropocentric way, and we're trying to assume we know. Where we're assuming we know what they want, and we have no clue what the hell they want. They may not have any moral or ethical compass. We don't know. And from what I've seen and from what I've experienced, I mean, you've been witnessing some major human rights violations, and I don't look at this as I'm not sanguine that UAP and this type of phenomenology is beneficial. It may be, but I don't know. I just naturally cautious. And I think people should not just run off and jump into this and say, yeah, we want to know what this is all about just because we want to satisfy our curiosity.
But I'm under the impression there are a group of people, Chris Bledsoe being one of them, Deborah Jordan-Kauble being another, who was on this channel recently, and who feel that the contact that they're experiencing presently is positive. It's beneficial. They've learned from it. They don't regret it. Some people say if I had to do it over again, I would. But at the same time, they acknowledge at the time the initial contacts were traumatic. And I think that would be, in your case, there was certainly trauma associated with it as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, it sort of resembles an initiation ceremony, maybe from the Greek mystery schools, where, they lock you in a cave for 3 days, no food, no water. You basically go out of your mind. You have mystical experiences, but you come out a very changed person. You seem to touch something that's out there because you don't have any distractions. There's no noise, no sound, no light. Your sensory package is essentially shut off. So you're transported someplace else, which shows you, wow, there's a lot more going on with my daily life than it, and you come out a changed person. That's not enough for me. I can have a traumatic experience that's highly disruptive. Hell, have a kidney stone. You want a disruptive experience? Have a serious one, and that will change you. Absolutely change you. And it changes you for the positive in a way because, you come to realize, A, I never want to have one of those again, and B, I'm going to appreciate life more because I, had a close call here that I came as close to losing my marbles as I possibly could until they gave me some Dilaudid. So I get the logic, but once again, the logic is based on, your personal experience with this particular phenomenon. But it's not the same experience that everybody has. I think you can say I think it's fair to say that most people go through, and I think Peter Sturck mentions this in one of his books. He has this whole list of things, ending in a theophany, right? Ending in this change, a spiritual change that turns you into a more open, compassionate, understanding, and kind person. Who would not want that? Would I want to go through the initial trauma to end up that way? Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to say. And I think probably, yes, I would probably choose that myself. But in my particular case, I've always been a rather open-minded guy. And I like to think of myself as a reasonably kind guy and compassionate guy. Always have been. My wife's the same way. This experience didn't do that to me. It didn't open up any doors. It pissed me off because something happened and, my wife was damaged. I was damaged also. And, and for what end? Now, the end might have been that I became fascinated with this topic. And now I'm on Jeffrey Mishlove's show and talking about this and somebody's listening to me. And that's what this phenomenon wanted me to do. And perhaps it's showing me that this is the way, but that's me interpreting it that way. I don't know if that was the real reason behind that. I think we have to be very, very careful. The ego gets into this sometimes, and we tend to interpret it, the way we best know how to interpret it, and we interpret it based on what we know. Being an intelligence officer, I just learned, you don't trust something just because it looks a certain way. You always go back. For instance, if you recruited a spy, right? Let's say the spy was Russian, and the spy is giving you all this great information, and you're going back and you're giving it to the president and saying, look, this is great. But that's not how it works. Because what happens is you have a group of people who are, who are looking at that information that this guy is feeding me, right? And they're assessing it constantly, and they're comparing it with other information that they have that may, work with it or correspond to it or may prove that it's actually true. Or it may say, well, he has a little holes in this. He's not telling us the truth completely here, but he may not know. We don't really know. And that's why they say spy work is a wilderness of mirrors, because you never really know in the end. It might be he's 100% accurate. It might be he's 90% accurate, but it's not his fault. Or he might be giving you 90% great information, but he's a double agent, and the information he's giving you isn't really because he has an ulterior motive for giving it to you. So, and I think Jacques Vallée has pointed this out in Passport to Magonia and his other works. There's a trickster element to all of this. We cannot ignore that trickster element. We cannot ignore the fact that these things, these intelligences, if there's more than one, there probably is, are able to come into our homes, they're able to come into our workplace, they're able to come in anywhere the hell they want and take us if they want to take us, and then implant memories if they choose to do so. So where the hell do you trust? Where's the trust in this? Particularly when they're not explaining themselves. I'm highly skeptical of things like that. I'll give you an example. With Chris's thing with the lady, right? The lady isn't the first time. Chris wasn't the first person to experience the lady. But if you look at Chris's experience, it sort of mirrors the experience this young couple had in the desert during the Mojave incident. There's a wonderful book that was written on it, where, and let me tell you about that, where this couple are being taken up by some grays into a spacecraft, and they're absolutely petrified. All of a sudden, a lady appears, says, "Oh, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine." They pass out or lose consciousness, and next thing they know, they wake up the next morning around their campfire, right? Well, Chris had a sort of a similar experience, a bull comes charging out of his backyard, a bull of all things, and runs him over. He looks up, and as he sees this beautiful lady, right? And the lady, and he sort of gets up, and the lady has her hands open and said, "This is your burden," and hands him what he described at the time that looked like a fuzzy piece of sausage, right? Now, I think he describes it a little bit differently now, but it's pretty much the same thing. So he gets this thing, gets it from her. And what the hell does that mean? This is your burden. So he throws it away, puts it in a kennel, an empty kennel, and then the next day he comes out, and of course it's not there. But the lady didn't sit him down, and the lady didn't explain to him who she was, what her purpose was, what her intention with Chris was, how that's going to affect his family, the things that he needs to do to make his life a little bit easier so he can take on this message and bring this message to a group of people. It didn't tell him, here's a salve, you can rub on your body that will ease your anxiety and any kind of, neuroses that you've got from this thing. In other words, there was precious little information passed on beyond this, strange message. This is your burden. So you're left to interpret all this, much like you're left with the religions who tell you a story, their narrative. And then, I was born and raised Catholic, and you would go to church, and you would go to, catechism school, and religion classes. And I went to Catholic schools, and there's a limit. There's a limit, and if you're a thinking person, you realize there's something funny going on here. You're not giving me the only answers you're giving me now. Once I go past a certain point, is God works in mysterious ways, or we can't explain it, and you shouldn't try, because if you try, you're doubting God, and that's not what you're here for. Not here to do. So, the CIA was a really good learning experience for me, because I learned you can't trust anybody. You really can't. I mean, I trust my wife. I trust you, for instance, because you seem like an awfully nice fellow, and I have no reason not to trust you. But you also don't have any control over my life. All right? So I can afford to trust you. Am I sounding too, I don't know, pessimistic? I don't mean to be. Or I'm a cup, half full guy, right?
Well, in a way, it seems as if people at our level are the ones who are actually engaged in disclosure. I have over 100 videos on this channel right now interviewing people such as yourself about their experiences, covering a wide range of the picture. I mean, if you put those interviews together, and of course, I'm just one small part of what's taking place, there are 1,000 voices speaking out now. The government may not be in control. I had one guest who said it's the aliens or the non-human, whatever they are, who are really in control of how much disclosure there will or will not be. But it does seem to me as if the human population itself is sharing what we know independently of the government. And so a lot of information is seeping slowly into the general awareness of the population.
I think you're absolutely right. And there is a limited disclosure going on, and has been over the last 80 years. And I think a lot of people suffered for doing that, for opening themselves up. to that. But if you, and I was I was speaking with someone the other day, and this person was very skeptical of all of this, and I said, well, gee, I don't care about persuading you. When we started To the Stars, that was the thing we all agreed on. We're not here to persuade anybody. We're believers. We know it's true. If you choose, here's the evidence that we have. And if you choose to believe it, fine. If you don't, well, you're on your own path, as the Buddha says, you know what I mean? And go forward and live your life the way you want to live it. But there's a point when you look at, when you read, there's no way you can read the literature, just like to read the literature on NDEs. There's no way you can read the literature on UAP and the phenomenon and not walk away saying, it's ridiculous not to believe this is true. It's absolutely true. Yes, you want to do a field-centric study. That's what we normally have to do on these things, or anecdotal studies, because we don't have that reliability, predictability quotient that we need to do real science. Well, I shouldn't say real science, the science that we have. Because a lot of science that we have is actually scientism, right? It's not quite science. It's really dogmatic. You don't fit into my little paradigm. I'm sorry, it doesn't exist, and I'm going to trivialize it, and you can just go away because it doesn't exist. It's what Charles Fort called the damn facts, right? And of course, it's essentially what science is doing to a certain extent. Instead of opening up, you mentioned William James, I think, a few times in some of your podcasts, and his idea of radical empiricism, which I think was brilliant, because, science is supposed to be open. Science is supposed to say, there's been 500,000 people who've had an abduction experience, or claim they've had an abduction experience. They're either all hallucinating this experience, but they're hallucinating it with the same variables each time, or it's real and they are being abducted. It's just the flip side of the same problem. Well, if you're a scientist, I would think that this is something that you'd want to look into and find out, why did 500,000 people hallucinate this, or why did 500,000 people get abducted? And that's just a small number. We're probably into the millions. I'm not saying abductions in the millions, but certainly contact of some form from either 1 through 6, close encounters of the first to the sixth kind. We're easily in the tens of millions on that already. My God, how much information do you want? How much more do you want me to throw in your face? Are you going to believe me or not believe me? I don't care. But if 1,000, 100 million of me come up and say yes, you can ignore that? That's not science to me. I just think that's willful ignorance.
Well, there was apparently a government policy going back, as I recall, to the Robertson Commission of 1954, that the government felt that it would be essential to start debunking these claims because they were concerned, I gather, about a public panic.
Yeah, well, there was a legitimate concern in the 40s. All the way up, I would say, through about the 60s, given who we are at the time. I mean, you're living in a very agrarian country, right? You just come out of World War II. Our telecommunication systems are really the best described as being primitive. And the Soviets at the time had a very effective disinformation directorate within the KGB. And that went back long before the KGB to the, Chekists and things along those lines, and the NKVD. And so they were very sophisticated. And so the big concern, and this has, been written about, and, that they were going to flood our system with UFO reports, and it was going to be problematic. And it was real. I mean, the Air Force and the Army were really concerned about that. And I understand that. But they also understood, imagine this. It's 1947. You're Truman, President Truman. The Air Force comes to you and says, we have a downcraft, or more than one downcraft, probably more than one by this time. This has been going on pre-Foo Fighters in World War II. We've been seeing these anomalous objects into the sky, and it's quite real. So in 1947, the famous Twining memo. I mean, they come out and the Air Force basically says, this is accurate. We don't know what these things are, and they're definitely not Chinese, and they're not Russian or Soviet, and they sure as hell ain't ours. We had P-38s. We were just developing, the jet engines, and so this is totally frightening to them, and they don't know what to do with it. So they drop this into Truman's lap. So Truman does the National Defense Act, and where he creates the Department of Defense, he creates a Joint Chiefs of Staff, he creates a CIA, he creates a National Security Council. So he's given this very large hot potato of UAP, or UFO, as they called it at the time. And he knew it was true, and he knew it was accurate. So what do you do with it? Well, you hand it off to somebody else, and it's usually the new guy on the block, and it's probably CIA. So CIA did pick it up, and if you read the unclassified version of this, I think that Gerald Haynes wrote, you can get it on the CIA website, he discusses what it was like in the 40s all the way up to the 90s, and he sort of stops there and said, "Now we don't do it anymore," whatever. But what he talks about was how the directors of Central Intelligence at the time always made the point that even if this was a 1 out of 100 chance of being true, we cannot ignore it, because the CIA was formed. The charter specifically states, I'm paraphrasing here, but we don't want another Pearl Harbor. So our goal is to find out what's detrimental to the United States and how and we're working directly for the president, mind you, and a National Security Council. We don't work for anybody else. CIA works directly for the president. So we are going to be his intelligence agency. We're going to inform him, and we're going to tell him what we found out. So now you've got this, and you're trying to figure out how to manage it. So you bring in maybe the Air Force, an element of the Air Force. So maybe it's the CIA and the Air Force looking at this, because those are the two principal characters at the time. And they're looking at this, and they can't make heads or tails out of it. They truly can't make heads or tails out of it. So you don't want to throw good money after bad. So what you do is you look at it, well, how do we hide it? Well, you're going to hide it in the best place possible, and that's the private industry. So you give it to private industry, and you create maybe a sole source contract with a couple of these defense contractors, and you say, you guys handle this. We'll provide some of the early funds. You can experiment it on yourself, and the technology that you may have gained from this, well, obviously you're going to know it. So if you need to use it, but then that technology then has to be sold back to the military, right? So you have these very sophisticated agreements in there with privacy clauses, I'm sure indemnification clauses, because these companies are taking a huge risk. So they're looking at this, gets siloed out, and everybody's trying to figure out what it is, and nobody can. And I don't think anybody has really figured it out. I think they've extrapolated a lot of science from what they're seeing, but I don't think they've captured the essence of the technology. So this goes on for a while, and then you have, Project Sign, Project Grudge, and you have the Robertson panel and the Condon panel. And essentially what these people are saying, was like, look, this is not something that should be out in the public, because this could be highly problematic. And they realized at the time this can have all kinds of problems dealing with sovereignty, the idea of sovereignty. This goes back to the Alexander Wendt and I can't remember, David Duval article from Ohio State on the UFOs and sovereignty, which is absolutely brilliant. And they talk about this because it really can undermine the presidential authority, because the president's main goal is what? To protect the United States. If he comes out and announces that he can't protect the United States because a group of, an intelligence is far greater than ours and we have no protection against it, that's one of the first things people are going to ask. And he says that. And that's why it's not coming out. There's no defense against this. At least we don't have any yet that I know of. So, and then this is what I think, I can't remember the fellow's name. He called it it became, I don't think there's any official government policy on hiding this, because that would be a covert action program, and you can't do that in the U.S. I mean, that is highly illegal. You can't fool the American population. The government is not allowed to fool them. I think they did with it. I think there was elements of that, no question about it. I think it was a huge mistake on their part. But what happened was more of a tradition of disbelief. That's what this guy called it. Hufford was his name. Yeah, it was a wonderful term because it's essentially what it does. It gets picked up, and it just becomes traditional for Hollywood, for journalists, for the government to make fun of this, and it just cascades and snowballs until you actually end up having, quote unquote, a covert action program, an ersatz one. It's not really official. It just happens that way. And nobody decides to stop it, because if you stopped it, then you're admitting you know something. And then the other thing I want to point out is look, working in the government for as long as I did, I don't believe in the deep state. I do not believe in cabals. I do not believe in power-hungry defense contractors looking to control technologies like free energy that we got from the aliens. And I think that's all nonsense. And I think these are good people, honest people who were faced with a very, very highly problematic situation and went about trying to fix it the best way that they could. So they, instead of having their normal security protocols, they probably use protocols from the Atomic Energy Commission that we had in the Manhattan Project, which are draconian, which is why you get other problems with this down the road where people get shut up and, get threatened and what have you, because that indeed is what happened during the Manhattan Project, when people went a little bit too far. So I think it's all reasonable. I think there's a reasonable, working in government as long as I do, that's how, I did a lot of my operation. There's a reasonableness where you go and you have these tools you can use, and you use those tools to keep things quiet and to keep it secret. Now, as far as like billions of dollars going to fund this program, no. I would be surprised. I don't know. I would be surprised, if it topped 50 million or 100 million, and that's a drop in the bucket in the government. That doesn't even count for most things. I also like to point out to skeptics, do you honestly think the government would have created even a $20 million program to study UFOs if they didn't think that there was something going on? Of course they did. And Lou Elizondo's program and Jim Lukatsky's program, OFSAP, and Jay Stratton's program. This was a small program. This was run, by the Navy, because the Navy was having all this trouble. But it wasn't the big program. The big program is totally different. So now, whether they had access to the big program or not, I don't know. I think maybe one or two did. I don't know. So they create Arrow. They create all this stuff because truly something's going on. It's ridiculous to say it isn't. It is. You have too many people witnessing it, as you said earlier.
Just use a new term, the big program. What did you mean by that?
I will speak hypothetically, because people have asked me, is there a legacy program? Is there a big UFO, UAP program out there somewhere? If I knew that there was, I couldn't tell you, because it would be classified, and as a former agency officer, even if I'm aware of a classified program that I'm not read into or have nothing to do with, I can't expose it. So what I can do is tell you that based on my experience, and it's just not just me, it's almost every government person, whether they're in the intelligence community or not. Well, how would this work? If they had a down craft in 1947, let's say at Roswell, and what would they do with it and who would run it? Well, the CIA's already come out and said they're looking at it. They don't say anything past 1990, fine. But they're already doing this, and they're telling you how they did it and where exactly in the agency they were doing it. All right. So, and the Air Force, it probably has their own place. Air Force Office of Special Intelligence, probably the ones who are running it. And I'm speaking hypothetically here because I don't know. And I can speak of this in a conditional sense because I can't talk about things. But when people like Dave Grush come out and he makes the statements that he made without, based on my knowledge of how the government works, the man appears to be telling the truth. Yeah, the way he says what he said makes perfect sense to me. More than perfect sense to me. So, do I take him at his word? Yes, I do. Just like I take Lou Elizondo at his word.
Just in case some of our viewers are not up to speed on David Grush and Lou Elizondo, I know they've been all over the news, but could you just summarize what their claim is?
Yeah, I mean, Lou Elizondo was for all intents and purposes, running the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which was a program in the Department of Defense, a very highly classified program in the Department of Defense that was looking at the UAP phenomenon and also other phenomenology associated with it. It was a program started by Harry Reid, Senator Inouye, and gosh, I think the third one was
Stevens from Alaska.
Yes, and they got the initial funding for it, $22 million, and it was in the front page of the New York Times on in December or November 22nd, 2017, or December 2017. And it ran there for 2 days if you wanted to look at it. And it was funny because the front page article is basically all about the UFO, that the government has actually funded a study, for UFOs. And that was supposed to be the big news. And, as I said to Leslie Kane, who was one of the authors who wrote it, I said, that's the wrong story. I said, the story is we're not alone on the planet, and that's what we should be focusing, not a $20 million. I mean, $20 million, like I said, it's a spit in a bucket. It doesn't amount to anything when you look at the defense budget, right? Or the intelligence budget. But Lou later, was started running it. And unofficially, I would go down to the Pentagon and chat with Lou. And Hal Puthoff was the scientist with Eric Davis. They worked with ATIP very closely. And they introduced me to Lou. And then, I was there unofficially, but I was there for probably about 2 years and sharing data and what have you that I knew. And then he shared data with me. So, I mean, it was very clear, very, very clearly real. And the concern in senior ranks in DOD was real. You can't have a nuclear strike group out and have them plagued by these craft. And you got F-18s and you're in a training exercise and you want to send this extraordinarily expensive aircraft up in the air when you see dozens of these Tic Tacs flying all over the place and or other anomalous objects. And damn well that you have the best multispectral systems in the world on these, USS Princeton and on, all the other ships that were there. And they're seeing these with different systems. They're all saying the same thing. A, they're real. We can get them. You get gun camera footage of them. What you didn't see when you saw those 3 videos, Go Fast and Tic Tac, and there's the other one, you didn't see all the data that was surrounding the images. That was, they removed all that data because it was all top secret. It would giving you a lot more information. So the pilots that saw that knew what that data was. And to them, there was no question in their mind because they actually saw the thing, that this is indeed real and that the technology involved in this was not of this planet. It just isn't. And when you talk to these guys like I have, privately, and we share other information, it's just, so now we have an issue, now, and then some of the congressmen now that are being briefed on it are not very happy because they think they have a right to know this. And I like to point out, I spoke to a couple of the committees and I told them, look, it's not a congressional program. It's an executive program, and it's run by the president, and only the president can say anything about this. I can't say anything about it. The president has to come out. That's what Dave Grush said. Dave Grush was he worked for AARO, the All Anomaly Research Organization or office that the Pentagon set up to study this. And he went to various intelligence agencies and questioned the people that were actually working on these programs. And they all told him the same thing, same story. So he takes this back and he decides Congress has a need to know. And Congress hasn't been told, which I don't think was true. He didn't know that, but he thought the public also had a right to know. And perfectly fine. He did the exact right thing you're supposed to do if you're a government employee, if you think there's something going on that's not legal. And he did it the right way. So I give him a load of credit for that. And then he explains what it was, and then he's briefing some of the congressmen on this. Now, the congressmen are upset, saying, well, wait a minute. We're in charge of spending for the government and what have you. We should have the ability to know this. But what Congress doesn't realize is these programs, they exist at a very, very high classified level. They're special access programs. And I would say maybe the Gang of Eight, if them, are, have the clearances to basically know of these programs. And even if they were to be told of the programs, they could never discuss it, nor could they ever debate it publicly. It's not theirs to do. They would be told officially, but just, as a professional courtesy that these things are going on. Don't forget, the CIA works directly for the President of the United States. All right. So if the CIA would be running this program, they just basically talk to the president, and the president talks to them, and those conversations are not subject to congressional notification, approval, or anything else. And when CIA goes to the oversight committees and briefs their programs, the committees can't tell them, we don't like what you're doing. Well, they can't say that, but the only thing they can do, they can't stop the programs. All they can do is stop the funding. So, the intelligence agencies that work directly for the president answer to him and him only, really. They do tell Congress, because Congress does give them money, and that's been going on since 1975 now, and it's a great thing to do. And they've been very, very open and honest with Congress, and Congress, I think, has been wonderful about it. As a matter of fact, Congress has basically said in some of these programs, holy cow, this is great. And give a round of applause. You need more money, because what you guys are doing are great. So the relationship has always been very good, I thought, between them. But that doesn't mean if the president, like Truman or Eisenhower, issued a presidential executive action document or something along those lines, where he said, this is an extraordinary circumstance. I'm creating this super secret thing that nobody gets to know about, not even Congress. That's basically he can do that. That's in the power. That's in the Constitution. He has that right to do that without acknowledging. Now, has he done that without telling somebody? Probably there's one or two people in Congress that know about it at any given time. Maybe one or two people in the National Security Council that know about it. Most presidents probably got a very generalized briefing on it, saying, yeah, this is real. If you want to know more, we can tell you more. But if you know more, then you don't have plausible deniability anymore, or you can't do anything about it anyway because we don't understand it. But we'll if there's something happens, we discover something that's groundbreaking or earth-shattering, we'll come back and tell you. So imagine if you're a president of the United States. Do you really want to know this? Do you really want to have that hanging on your shoulders? I think not, particularly when you have somebody else doing the job for you.
Danny Sheehan has argued that in his mind, what's holding disclosure back is the desire to reverse engineer this technology and develop weapons.
I think he's absolutely right. I think that's one of the concerns. There's a huge national security aspect of this. Let's say, for instance, hypothetically speaking, if we have downcraft, China probably has downcraft. Russia probably has downcraft. At least that's what my knowledge is, all right? Everybody's working on the same thing. If they own this technology, endgame. It's endgame, because you now control space, you now control the air, and now you have weapon systems that are incomparable, right? So, hence the obscene security around all of this, because what you don't want to give away is what you know, what you may know, and they don't want to give away what they may know, because if that indeed happened, then so maybe the other side will be able to put that together with something they know that nobody else knows, and then again you have a problem. So that's legitimate. It's a national security concern. And then the other one goes back to, again, let's go beyond the nuts and bolts of this. That's, to me, isn't that important. That's important in the sense that it's a national security thing. Well, before I go on to this point, let me make another point. Let's just say you were looking at this alien technology and you discovered something like free energy, a type of energy that can fuel just about anything. And you say to yourself, well, okay, do we hide that, or do we basically let that out? So if you decide to let that out because you want to basically help people living in impoverished countries have energy without having to pay for it, and they have these systems that you put out there, you've also just given it to the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans, who are then free to develop it into weapons, and now you have weapon symmetry. Do you really want that? And the answer is no, you really don't want that. Because what weapons do is every time you develop a weapon, like if the U.S. developed a weapon, the first thing Russia does is if they find out about that weapon, they have to get countermeasures. And that's what this is all about. The Defense Department is all about. You go back and forth and you get countermeasures. Then we do countermeasures until you get a whole new level of innovation, and then you're a whole new level. Okay. So that's another one of the reasons that you might want to sit on something like that. The second thing, and the most important thing, is let's get away from the nuts and bolts. And this goes back to what we were discussing earlier. The important thing about UAP isn't the nuts and bolts. It's what's behind it. It's all about what our reality is. It all depends. I mean, not all depends. It's finding out that the world we live in, our consensus reality, isn't quite full. We're not seeing the big picture here. We're seeing a very, very small picture. Our brain is sort of blinkered. Our sensory packages are sort of small. We can only suck in so much information. I used this example the other day. I said, you get in a car and you're driving to the grocery store. I said, your brain is limiting the amount of information that you need to drive that car. You need to be conscious. You need to know what the brakes are. You're using muscle memory, reflexes to get here and there, but you're not really aware of all the different, neuronal synapses that are happening and how you're breathing. And, this is what we used to call awareness in the 60s, right? That you always want to become more aware of what's behind you, and that you're just these energy patterns floating around, and that this one quotidian thing of driving it just entails thousands and thousands of processes. But your brain basically stops that from happening because you can't deal with it. You just can't deal with it. Well, I think in some respects, I think maybe the government realizes this, that if you come out and you tell somebody, all right, there's a non-human intelligence here. Here's what they have the ability to do. Here's what we can do to counter that. Nothing. God can't help you. Has it in the past. Generally won't happen. Ain't going to happen. So the veil's been lifted. And now you see that you're not below God in the angels. You're now about 3 or maybe 4 down the line here, right? So, you're now a talking monkey, right? According to these new intelligences. That's a hell of a position to be put in overnight. And it's a hell of a position to have to deal with. So are we prepared for that? And even if we were told that and told that was the truth, how do we absorb it physically? How do our minds absorb it and our brains? We're not developed enough. And I don't see NHI coming down here and hitting us over the head with a feather duster and saying, now you now have cosmic consciousness. Now you're able to figure this out. Really? That's not going to happen. So I think it's an extraordinarily complicated mess. And I call this, what sociologists call a wicked problem. This is the classic mother of all wicked problems. How do you develop a mess map on this? How do you go into a room with 20 of the smartest people in the world and say, figure out NHI and figure out what the hell we're going to do? And now you got sticky notes over, a room the size of a football field with all the variables that you have to contend with. And you have to somehow make some kind of effort to go out and then say, well, okay, here's a rational plan for us to deal with this. I just don't see that happening.
Well, it seems as if part of the problem is that we need a theory, a larger theory that can take into account the wide range of phenomena that are being observed across the board. I know of a couple such theories that have been proposed, and it seems to me that they're promising. I don't know if they're being taken seriously or if they're being adequately developed, but for example, a lot of people are now talking about the simulation theory, that what we call physical reality is actually being generated by what would be the equivalent of a computer, probably a computer in according to one theorist, Tom Campbell, the computer exists within what he calls the larger consciousness system. Other people would say it's hyperspace, but it seems to me that there are some promising theories that could go a long way to helping people get a handle on this.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. And, I think if you spoke to most scientists, a very significant portion will tell you the chance of us living in a simulation or a computer game or whatever you want to call it is 50-50. But even knowing, even if we had a theory like that we were able to look to, sort of like, some form of consciousness studies and quantum mechanics, where you were able to pull those together in some form or fashion and look at this and maybe this can explain it. Well, probably way better than I do that consciousness studies are extraordinarily difficult, as with quantum mechanics. And they're both frightening to a certain extent because we really can't codify anything with any degree of certitude. So I don't know if that's going to give people a sense of relief or a sense of order, or give them enough. What it does is it has a tendency to become another religion, another belief system. When the Catholics, during the Catholic Mass, and the priest holds up the host and says, Hoc est unum Deum in Latin, he's saying this is the body of Christ, and he absolutely means it 100% true. And when he said, this is his blood, it was drinking a glass of wine. It is not wine. It is actually Jesus' blood. So a believer would say, yes, this is the transubstantiation. But there's that veil there, isn't there, when you're in Mass and you're sitting there? Well, you probably don't go to Mass, but when you're watching this, you're sort of say, yeah, okay, I get the concept. But when somebody lifts it up and says, well, that's actually real, the veil's gone. It's actually real what he's doing. Because maybe a lot of people intellectually could say, yeah, it could be real, but they don't know for sure. But when you tell people, and I had this happen to me regarding psychic phenomenon, when I was told about some studies that the government had run in reaction to what, at the time, the Soviets and then later the Russians were doing. That's how MK Ultra got started. That's how a lot of these things get started, how a remote viewing got started. As crazy as that may sound, RV, because it does sound crazy. Some guy goes out on a silver cord, and goes to a set of coordinates and comes back and it writes down or scribbles down what he saw or she saw. And then you can't use it in an intelligence assessment because you don't know how to explain it. And because you don't know how to explain it, well, you don't go anywhere with it. And either the program gets canceled or the program gets backburnered or it goes off someplace else for a while, which happened, I think, with the remote viewing program. It was statistically successful. But I have no way to explain this particular mental technology, I guess you can say. So even if you did have a theory of everything, which Mr. Campbell, I'm just starting his book, by the way. I really chomping at the bit to get to it. Even if you had that, I don't know how much solace it might offer people that are drifting in a world, or what Whitley Strieber calls a forest of hypotheses. It's like you walk in there and somebody says it's this, and then somebody says it's that. No, it's this. No, it's that. No, it's this. And you get confused, and we're not born with an instruction booklet. We don't know anything. We don't know what's going on out there. We like to think that we do. And, I would think that this not knowing, this confronting the void every day, without the distractions of religion and culture and, societal norms, I would like to think that people deep down having this general, not fear so much as fear of the unknown, but I think it generates compassion. And I really do, because what it basically tells you is, holy cow, we're all in this together. Holy cow, we're all in the same boat. But when you throw in things like religion and you throw in all this other kind of stuff, that's when you start dividing things up. And that's when everybody starts getting on their hobby horse and saying, oh, no, I got the right interpretation of what life's supposed to be. And yes, and I'll kill you to prove it. So I'm one of these guys that just, blithely goes through his life, and in blissful ignorance, hoping that maybe one day, something will happen to give him a little bit more wisdom.
Well, we're in a very fast-moving culture at the moment, with AI accelerating things very rapidly and many other changes taking place. Cryptocurrency, for example. New theories are being developed. Millions of people getting in touch with such things as near-death experience, and the research in parapsychology seeping into the culture. It makes me think that our problem is simply that it's premature right now for us to have answers, but in, let's say, another 200 years or another 50 years, things will be very, very different.
I agree. This is what's so good about what I love about science, and science in general. My God, what they have done for this world, and all this wonderful, wonderful things. I've been on statins since I can remember, and I thank the guy who developed statins, or the pharmaceutical company did. I can't remember who. I think it was Merck or somebody. Thank you for prolonging my life. I appreciate that. And thank you for tetanus shots, and thank you for polio vaccines, and thank you for, COVID vaccines. You can go on and on forever. And that's going to continue to grow. And so we look at that. I just wish that the government had, a department of mystery, right? Where you would just take some of the finest scientific minds and blend them with the philosophers and psychologists and sociologists and biologists, and put them together and say, look at the mysteries that we have, because they're real. They're truly real, and they are scientific, because we need to go as far as our minds can take us. But look at these mysteries and figure out a way to attack these wicked problems so we can move forward with this. And the way we're doing it now, it's just too many silos. We don't have enough people talking with one another about this. We have brilliant physicists who are talking to brilliant physicists, but nobody's talking to the Zen mind, right? And nobody's talking to the religious scholar who just happens to know everything you could possibly imagine about comparative religions and, and mystical traditions in each religion. And of course, there's correspondences between the two. I remember when I was getting my master's degree, I was reading a lot about Ralph Waldo Emerson, because I was interested in American transcendentalism. So I picked up a book, and it was a book on Emerson's library. I was stunned to find he had dozens and dozens of books from Emanuel Swedenborg, the 17th century Swedish mystic. So then I picked up Wilson Van Dusen's, I think something about other realities.
The Presence of Other Worlds.
Presence of Other Worlds. Brilliant book. And I remember reading that in grad school. And I gotta say to myself, why would Emerson, be so attracted to this? And then that gets you into German Romanticism, and that gets you into all other kind of stuff. And then you're reading about, the history of the world, the spiritual history of the world, the strange history of the world that really isn't spoken about in high school and college and what have you. Things you have to find out on your own. The esoterica, but it's there and it's fascinating. Yes.
Jim, we've had a fabulous discussion. I know we could talk a long time, but I think we've covered the bases at this point, and I'm just delighted with your perspective. I appreciate that you are indeed an insider, and your perspective will be very valuable to people in the general public, which is our audience. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for entertaining me. I have a tendency to go on a little bit, but I'm very excited about this, and I'm very optimistic for the future, particularly regarding UAP and everything else. But let's proceed with some common sense, but let's proceed. Let's move forward as much as we possibly can with this.
Well, I'm very grateful that you were able to take the time to be with me, and I'm going to cross my fingers in the hope that we can continue our discussion and do a few more of these.
I would love to. Anytime, Jeffrey. I think you're wonderful. I appreciate it so much.
Well, thank you again. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here.
Hear, hear.
Book 4 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.